On the 15th of October 1987, the UK was battered by the Great Storm. It was one of the most destructive windstorms in the UK on record. 22 people were killed as a result of the Great Storm, and the modern-day equivalent of £2 billion worth of damage was left in its wake. Over 15 million trees were blown down within 24 hours. It was said to be the worst storm in the UK in over 300 years, and was sadly made much worse by the daily weather reports failing to accurately predict its severity.
Earlier on today, apparently a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't.
In more recent years, we have started to experience more frequent and destructive windstorms that match and even exceed the strength of the Great Storm. Each of these weather events leaving their own trail of destruction in their wake.
Storm Isha in full force in Brighton, and there's more to come. Another storm is following swiftly today, Jocelyn.
A major incident has been declared across parts of the south coast of England and the Channel Islands as Storm Ciarán brings heavy rain and strong winds.
In the end, the calling card of Storm Eunice was its devastating winds.
2 men have been killed by falling trees as Storm Arwen hit parts of the UK.
Forests and trees have increasingly become the primary victims of these windstorms, having a knock-on effect to our daily lives, our economy, and the valuable ecosystems that provide many important services, allowing us and many other species to thrive.
I don't think I've seen as many fallen trees in the last 20 years.
As climate change continues to alter the frequency and strength of these windstorms, developing an understanding of why trees are susceptible to being blown over is becoming an increasingly important topic of conversation. Our tendency to manage and control forest ecosystems for our own benefit could inadvertently be making our forests more vulnerable to future windstorms. Managed woodland isn't all that bad. It has its own benefits, yet with the likelihood of our storms getting worse becoming more and more likely prospect, many questions start to spring to mind, such as, are fallen trees actually a bad thing? And what could we do, if anything, to protect our forests from windstorms in the future?
This is what hurricane force winds look like. Unstoppable and unrelenting.
It's no surprise that we love our forests. They're these incredibly important habitats for a variety of species, but do so much for our world. They mitigate climate change and help clean our water, but they're also great stress relievers for those who visit them frequently. Yet in recent years, the growing intensity and frequency of windstorms is putting these habitats that we love so much under so much pressure, and more trees are being blown down. Over the past 70 years, 46% of all timber damage in Europe has been through wind damage. But with that said, are fallen trees really a bad thing? Let me show you. Deadwood is the term that we use to describe any dead tree. So that could be in part whether it's just a big branch that's fallen off, or a full tree like this one behind me. Deadwood is incredibly important for the environment. It's basically like a larder for the forest and provides a lot of nutrients and food after it dies. There are several different types of deadwood. The first is you've got fallen deadwood, which is kind of self-explanatory. It's wood that has fallen. However, you've got the rarer standing deadwood, and this deadwood is really important for certain species of wildlife that will only use it rather than fallen deadwood. Once a tree has died, it will start to rot, and fungi and other organisms will start to break down its structure. Cavities will start to form within the tree after it starts rotting, and insects and bugs can start to live within it. This will then attract birds such as woodpeckers, who will feed off the bugs.
And as woodpeckers start to feed, they'll create holes within this tree that then other organisms can't live within. So if deadwood like this is so important for an environment, why are we so concerned about living trees getting blown down by winds? Now, this might seem obvious, but in order to get deadwood, you have to have killed a living tree. And that's where a problem lies. Living trees do a lot of important things for our environment. These are known as ecosystem services. They provide habitats for a lot of other species, but they also sequester carbon from our atmosphere, storing it within their bodies and helping mitigate climate change. Not only that, they clean water when they live around river edges by basically filtering pollutants through their roots. On average, the amount of trees fallen per year as a result of wind is very, very small. It's almost 0.1%. But over the last decade, certain storms have done more damage than that average within a few days. Since the 1990s, 420 million hectares of trees have been lost through deforestation and many other activities. That's the equivalent of 17.5 times the size of the UK. But we also know that our biodiversity within forests is at great risk. 53% of all woodland species are in decline, and at least 10% of those are close to extinction. Not only is the damage to trees by increasing storms through climate change an issue ecologically, it's also a concern economically. As trees are knocked down in commercial plantations, there's a short period of time for the timber to be harvested before it rots. As these plantations have no option but to harvest the timber that has fallen during these storms, there becomes a surplus. The supply of timber available on the market overwhelmingly exceeds the demand. As a result, the price of timber plummets. In 2009, Storm Klaus did this in a dramatic effect, knocking the timber price down by 60 times its normal value, meaning that you could buy 1 metre squared of timber for just €1. With 3 million people relying on the forestry trade for a living, the economic effects of such damage caused during storms can be felt for many years to come. It's within this context, understanding the economical, environmental and social impact storm damage on trees can have, that we can consider just how important it might be to protect our future forests. But before we can go into that, we first have to understand, how do trees get blown down in the first place? The main way trees are blown down is through a process known as wind throw. Imagine a tree as a vertical lever. The tree trunk acts as the lever arm, while the base of the tree, before it goes into the ground, is known as the fulcrum. This is basically the pivot point in which the lever arm will work upon. This is how wind can topple trees. As wind blows into the tops of trees, it basically exerts a force on the bottom of the trees, pushing the roots up and out of the soil. Most trees can withstand these forces, using their roots as anchors to keep them standing strong. However, as trees grow taller, the force exerted upon their roots multiplies, even when the wind blowing into the tops of them stays the same. And this is known as mechanical advantage. Mechanical advantage is why taller trees are at greater risk of wind throw. Wind throw is just the process in which trees are blown down, but there are many other factors to consider to why a tree might actually be blown down rather than being able to withstand that wind. One of those factors is previous damage, and that can be through human influence, fauna and flora, or more likely, a previous windstorm. And so as windstorms are becoming more and more common, it looks as though we might see more and more trees blown down because of this reason. But there are other weather effects that are influencing whether a tree can withstand wind damage. Waterlogged soil is a risk to trees
as it compromises their root systems, and so basically they lose their anchor and their support. And this is becoming more and more of a problem, as increasing storms are also increasing the amount of flood risks in certain areas. There has also been research to show that as average temperatures in certain regions has been increasing over the years due to climate change, certain tree species are now growing taller, faster, but they're not necessarily growing stronger, and so they are more vulnerable to wind damage. There are so many other factors that we can explore when looking into why a tree is vulnerable to wind damage, but what we can see is that as our climate is changing, the direct and indirect effects of this are making trees potentially more vulnerable. So, is there anything that we can actually do to protect our future forests? For a long time now, we have understood that monoculture forest plantations don't nearly provide the same amount of ecological benefits as diverse mixed woodland, but they have remained because of their economic benefits. Research modelling the resilience of different forests to storms revealed that the forests that were the most resilient were those with the greatest diversity, and particularly those dominated by high wood density, slow growing trees such as oaks. This positive effect of tree diversity on the resilience of these forests to storms was even more pronounced in those areas with extreme climatic conditions, such as northern Scandinavia with its really cold and wet climate, or the hot and dry areas of the Mediterranean. However, this is only a single study, and despite it using data from 91,000 different plots of woodland throughout Europe, there's still a need for some in-field research. If this research holds true, it will once again exemplify the importance of biodiversity, and that protecting and nurturing it is a worthwhile endeavour. How we actually go about protecting our forests and to what extent is yet to be decided. But what we do know is that as the climate continues to change, the way we interact and protect our forests and other environments also needs to change. If we take the right steps now, this could be a story of resilience, of how our future forests will continue to stand strong and flourish long after our generations have passed on, but also a story about the resilience of people, of how we understood our past mistakes and faced those mistakes head on to make positive changes towards a more optimistic and hopeful future.